Hey everybody, thanks for clicking that thumbnail. Welcome to Talking Habs. Today's video is a bit of a history video. So it's an NHL history video. It's not necessarily Habs centric, but we're going to take a look at the best fighters by decade from the 1920s right up to today. So from the 2010's, because that era just ended. 2020's haven't started yet, so we don't have anybody for that for sure. So before we get to that, if you are new to the channel or you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe, ring that notifications bell. That's going to get you your daily fix of Bleu, Blanc, Rouge. So if you are a Habs fan, like I am, and you want to see some more content based on the Habs, that happens right here at Talking Habs. You give us a subscribe and you won't regret it. All right, let's get to this video. So this is based on an article I read the other day. And now I made a little bit of changes to it, but not for the old ones. So when you go back that far, I did a little research. It's hard to tell if there was anybody better than these guys. So I'm going to go with what was on there. But I made some changes in the, in the last, I think, 2 or 3. So yeah, we'll get to that. So we're going to start with the 1920s and work our way right up to today. So first one up, let me get something to write with. That would help. First one up is, let me look at my list. From the 1920s, Eddie Shore. Eddie Shore. So in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, even the 50s, hockey was a little different in that, today we have that rule where you can't intentionally injure a player. That's a big penalty. Well, back then they didn't really have that, and there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So, I mean, players were really dirty and tough compared to anything today. So Eddie Shore, Bruins defenseman Eddie Shore began his career in 1926, and as a rookie and in only 41 games amassed 130 penalty minutes. He was hot-tempered and quickly became known as one of the league's toughest and best fighters. In the movie Slapshot, that one of my favorite hockey movies. That's right up there. If not my favorite, that's right up there. There's a reason Paul Newman's character refers to Eddie Shore when he makes his old-time hockey rant. One of the best parts of that movie. He rants about old-time hockey. They want to get back to old-time hockey. By the way, he also mentions Toe Blake and Dit Clapper. It's Eddie Shore, like Dit Clapper, like Toe Blake. Yeah, well, that was a great rant. So he mentions Eddie Shore in there because he was horrible, I guess, compared to today, right? He won 4 Hart trophies, 1 first-team All-Star 7 times. Oh, first-team All-Star 7 times. Forget that one part. And was named one of the 100 greatest NHL players in history. It was Eddie Shore that ended the star at the time, Ace Bailey's career, with that horrible hit from behind. If you know anything about hockey history, you'll know what I'm talking about. That was a horrible hit by Eddie Shore on Ace Bailey. And he wasn't really after Ace Bailey. Apparently, he was really after Red Horner. I think I write that in here for the next one. You see, Bailey fell to the ice, and he hit his head hard, and he fractured his skull and nearly died. And then they had an all-star game to raise money for him. So back in those days, it was dangerous. I mean, no helmets, and guys were vicious. And you could hit your head on the ice very easily. And it's amazing nobody else, or not a lot of guys, died from that. I think somebody actually did. He was also a 2-time Stanley Cup winner, and he was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1947. He was also, an odd thing, he was an original organizer of the Ice Capades in 1940 with 8 others, and I think it was him and someone else who had the idea for it, and then he was one of the organizers. So the Ice Capades, Eddie Shore, one of the toughest fighters of his era. Next one up, number 2. For the 1930s, it was Red Horner. That's another name that, if you know your hockey history, you should know that name. So Red Horner led the league in penalty minutes from 1932 to 1940. 8 seasons he led the league. Horner was the intended target of Eddie Shore. So like I said, on the Ace Bailey hit, he was actually mad at Red Horner, and he thought Ace Bailey was Red Horner, so that's why he hit him so hard. He won the Cup in 1932. He played Played his entire career for one team, which was the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1964, amid some controversy, because what I read was that they said he wasn't even the best defenseman on his team. So it's kind of like, was he really that great a defenseman to be a Hockey Hall of Famer or not? I don't know. It's a long time ago, but that's what the controversy was. Next up, number 3. Black Jack Stewart. So Blackjack Stewart, no, he didn't get his name because he played cards. He didn't get his name because he was a black man. He got his name, I'll explain it in here actually. Blackjack Stewart was known for grinning when he was beating on another player. Played from 1937 to 1953 with Detroit and Chicago. He was a 2-time Cup winner, 5-time All-Star. You notice something? That at least two of these 3 guys were really good players as well. There's a bunch of them on here that are really good players. He was known also as the hardest-hitting defenseman of his time. He was tough but quiet. Teammates called him Silent Jack. He was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1964. He once played a full season with a broken hand in a cast. It was fractured. I mean, he played the whole season. The cast was specially designed for him to hold his hockey his hockey stick and be able to take shots. That's what I read. I got more about this guy, I think. Nope. I thought I wrote how he got his name. He got his name because, I wrote that somewhere. Why didn't I? Oh, here it is. I knew I wrote it. Stewart explained how he got his nickname. I body checked some fellow one night, and when he woke up the next day in the hospital, he asked who'd hit him with a blackjack. So that's how he got his nickname, the blackjack. You know, you hit guys with it. It's not a nice thing to be hit with. So that's how he got his name. So today, I don't think a guy could have a name Blackjack Stewart. It just wouldn't work today, I think. Next up, number 4, surprisingly, one of the greatest players ever to play the game, Gordie Howe. I think if you know about Howe, it's not really surprising that he would be up here for the 1950s. Gordie Howe was one tough hombre, if you want to put it that way. Well, I'll explain a lot about it. Gordie Howe, Mr. Hockey. And then when he retired, Mr. Coffee, that comes from him, Gordie Howe, considered one of the 3 or 4 best hockey players ever to play. I said that because if you're looking at best ever, Gordie Howe, Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Orr, and Maurice Richard are always in that conversation. Arguably, there's, maybe you don't agree with that, but Gordie Howe up there. In my mind, he was the 3rd best hockey player ever. Maybe the 2nd, but he was the 3rd. For me, Bobby Orr 1st, Wayne Gretzky 2nd, Gordie Howe 3rd. That's how I have it. But, everybody's different. And if you have it differently, doesn't mean you're wrong. I wouldn't say that. That's just how I see it. His offensive game is well known. I don't really have to talk about it, although I'll give his numbers. But his offensive game, we know Gordie Howe was a great offensive player. But he was also a punishing checker and an outstanding fighter. A Gordie Howe hat trick is when a player scores a goal, gets an assist, and has a fight. That's a Gordie Howe hat trick. One of the most feared players, both offensively and physically. Exactly, Gordie Howe, Mr. Elbow, his elbows were lethal. They were like getting hit with a rock. And he gave his elbow a lot in passing. He'd skate past you and whack you with an elbow. He knew how to get away with it. He played from 1946 to 1980, and in both the NHL and WHA. He had the longest career of any professional hockey player. Played until he was like 50, 51, 52, something like that. He amassed 2,084 penalty minutes in 2,186 pro games. So that's between the NHL and the WHA. And he had a total of 2,358 points between the 2 leagues. He won 6 Art Ross trophies, 5 times scoring leader, 6 Hart trophies, 23 All-Star games, which I think is a record. I don't know anybody who has any more than that. And he's a 4-time Stanley Cup winner. Gordie Howe, definitely one of the best players ever to play the game. There was something I wanted to... Oh, yeah. He also, in the WHA, he won some awards there. I didn't write them down because anybody really know what they are. I saw it on Wikipedia. It didn't explain what it was for exactly, so I didn't really write them down. But I think he won like 4 awards over there, or 2 awards and 2 All-Star games, something like that. So, I mean, he was just a great player, and he was really good up until his last season. I believe in his last season, I should have looked it up, but he got like 40 points in 80 games. He still was respectable at 50-odd years old. Let's see somebody else do that at 50. I think Jaromir Jagr is kind of trying to do that, but I don't think he'll match that. A few players wanted to fight. He also had 1,214 penalty minutes in 500. I got the wrong guy. I get the penalty minutes. Okay, I did all this stuff. So Gordie Howe, one of the best players ever to play the game, and one of the toughest players ever to play against. That's a pretty big accomplishment. Wayne Gretzky can't say that. Bobby Orr was a pretty tough customer. He could fight. You didn't really want to fight Bobby Orr, so he was close to that, but I mean a little bit older era, and you had to be. You had to be tough to play in those eras, because if you weren't tough, you were getting killed, literally almost. So you had to be, and yeah. It's not the same anymore with the new rules. You can't try to hurt somebody. Stuff like that makes a big difference. And now there's basically hardly any fighting, which we'll talk about. 1960s. The 1960s brought along Montreal Canadian John Ferguson. Fergie was a good fighter. He was feared, and he protected the Habs players. He was brought up basically to protect Belleville, which I'll get to in this. John Ferguson was the best fighter of the 60s. 100-plus penalty minutes in each of his 8 seasons. He only played for 8 seasons. Was considered the prototypical NHL enforcer of his era. He was promoted to the Habs in 1963 to protect Jean Beliveau, and 12 seconds into his first game was in a fight with Ted Green. And I want to say Boston, and I want to say Ted Green, was he the guy that, I don't know, died, or was he the one, he got hit in the head with a stick, and he almost died, or died, I'm not sure, obviously after this, but I think that was Ted Green. He won the fight. He led all rookies in scoring in his first season, again, another player who could play, and that was with 18 goals, and was runner-up in the Calder race that year, so that's Rookie of the Year. Scored the cup-winning goal in the 1969 Cup Final and had 29 goals that season, and was also a plus 30. 5-time Cup winner, 1,214 minutes in penalties in just the 8 seasons and in only 500 games. Few players wanted to fight Fergie, and he made space on the ice for his teammates. When he retired, which was very suddenly, and I remember that, he went into horse racing the first year he retired, I think. But it was really sudden when he retired. It was like, it was a really big thing when that happened. Everybody was up in arms about it. It caused problems for Montreal as well, as other teams roughed them up now. More and more. Rumor had it that GM Sam Pollock tried to bring him back out of retirement, and if I'm correct, he almost got him out of retirement, but it never worked. But John Ferguson was one of the best fighters and the best of his era. And I remember, not a lot, but I remember some of his fights. He was pretty damn good. So I don't know where my pause button went, but I want to take a break and have a drink of water. My pause button left. Sorry guys, my voice is going, so I had to do that. All right, next up, 1970s. 1970s brought us Terry O'Reilly, and I'm going to say also Stan Jonathan. As a pair, these guys were pretty vicious. And in the 80s, and actually, I guess in the end of the 70s, 79, 80, when Chris Nyland came along, he fought those guys a lot. So Nyland's not on for the 70s because he really only started right at the end of the 70s. So we'll see if he comes up later. So Terry O'Reilly. Let me get to this one. Got to change papers. Forgot to do that. So he wasn't the typical goon of the 70s as a fighter. He was a fighter who could do little else than fight. I think I got that wrong. So the prototypical fighter of the 70s was a guy that could basically just fight, couldn't really play. Terry O'Reilly wasn't that. O'Reilly could also play the game. He teamed up with guys like Stan Jonathan, though, and it was never an easy game when you played the Bruins. It wasn't. Stan Jonathan was also a pretty good fighter, a big guy. Lots of fights against Chris Nyland. And yeah, they were, you know, Stan Jonathan probably you could say was a goon, but Terry O'Reilly was not. He could play. That's for sure. Now I just got to find where I was. His blue-collar style made him one of the most popular Bruins ever. He was a very popular Bruin, a fan favorite. You could almost guarantee a bout or two whenever Montreal and Boston met, especially at the end of the 70s when Montreal had Chris Nyland and John Cordick, and every time Boston played Montreal, I mean, it was just amazingly... well, if you like fighting, it was entertaining because you knew there was going to be at least one, and it was rare that there wasn't. And yeah, so they were protecting the team, Nyland and Cordick. O'Reilly fought every one of the heavyweights of the era and handled himself well. He had 100+ penalty minutes 11 times in his career, so you know he was always getting in the dirty, doing something. While also producing offense with 4 20+ goal seasons. And he had a career year of 29 goals, 61 assists, and 90 points. So for a fighter, he had 90 points one season in 1977-78. And that was, he also had 2,095 career points in his 891 games played. And that was to go along with 606 points. So this was a guy who was tough, and you didn't really want to face him, and yet he was a really good hockey player. Now, I never liked Terry O'Reilly ever, but you know, when a guy's good at something, or he's not just a goon, you gotta respect that. So Terry O'Reilly, reluctantly, I want to say, the toughest fighter of the 70s. Now we go to the 80s, and right away I thought of Chris Nyland, but really the premier or the prototypical fighter of the 80s was Tiger Williams, who I hated. And not far behind him, and I'm going to put him here because he's a Hab, is Chris Nyland. Lots of fights, those guys, and very entertaining. And you knew, again, when certain teams were coming into town, you knew that there was going to be fighting between these guys. Tiger Williams, I wrote here, Tiger Williams, in brackets, I hated him, as I just said, is still the all-time penalty minute leader. 32 years after retiring in 1988. Now, I'll only give this, I didn't really check about today. This was written in, I got this from 2012. Somebody wrote some of this in 2012. So I got those numbers from that. I added the 8 years because I don't think anybody else in the last 8 years has surpassed him. And I don't think anybody else will. Let me see now. He had 300+ penalty minutes 6 times in his career. He was only 5'11" and 190 pounds. He wasn't huge, but fought anyone, bigger or not, and won a majority of his fights. He could also play, scoring 35 goals one year for Vancouver in 1980-81, and he had 20+ goals 3 times. In 962 games, he was 241 goals, 272 assists for 513 points, and that's extremely respectable for a guy you would call a goon. You literally would when he was fighting. He was a goon, but he could play. He had 3,966 penalty minutes in his career. 3,966 penalty minutes in his career. I don't see anybody surpassing that. His career high was 358 penalty minutes. I didn't write the year. So also in the 80s, Montreal had Chris Nyland, one of only 9 players to top 3,000 penalty minutes. So as I said, his almost 4,000 for Tiger Williams. Nobody's going to get that when only 9 players hit 3,000 or a little bit or over. So I don't see that happening. And he also has the highest penalty minute average per game with a 4 minute and 42 seconds per game. I just lost my microphone. Sorry guys, I hope it's okay. The most penalty minutes in a single playoff season, 141, and the most penalties in a single game with 10. 6 minors, 2 majors, a misconduct, and a game misconduct. They didn't say the game, I didn't look it up, but I remember that game. Whatever it is, I remember this when it happened. So that was 42 minutes in penalties in a game. Oh, this was versus Hartford, March 31st, 1991. Oh my God, I remember that game. I think that was the game. There's a picture of him basically trying to take on 6 Hartford Whalers. And I think that's the night. He was a wild man that night. Did I read anything else about him? I did. Nyland could also play, scoring 16 goals, 21 goals, and 19 goals from 1984 to 86. So that's 3 years in a row. Injuries caught up to him after that, though. After the 86 season, he was feared. I whistled on that. He was feared and would never back down from anyone. Or any 2 or 3. He would never back down. He finished his career with 3,043 penalty minutes and was a fan favorite during his time here in Montreal. And he kind of still is. He's got a radio show here. He's on the radio, the sports station. And he's a fan favorite. He sounds like a great guy. Had problems in his life. He's overcome them. And yeah, Chris Nyland, a guy I really respect and liked a lot. So next is the 1990s, and that, if you know fighting and you know the 90s, that belongs to Bob Probert. Proby. May you rest in peace. Bob Probert might just be the most feared and respected fighter from any era. And he most certainly was in his own era. In an era where every team had a designated fighter, if not a flat-out goon or 2, Probert stood out. He was 6'3", 225 pounds, and fought like a wild man. Early on in Detroit, he teamed up with Joey Kocur, and they would become known as the Bruise Brothers. And then later, when they were on different teams, they had a couple of fights themselves, and I think the first time it happened, it was like in a bit of a big scrap, and they just grabbed the player that was nearest them, and it was each other, and they had their first fight. And they had a few after that. He fought every fighter and goon in the game, but Probert could also play the game. In his 16-year career, he only averaged 24 points a season, but he had a 0.41 points per game average and had five seasons with 39 points or more. And his career year in 1987-88, he had 29 goals, 33 assists for 62 points. It was early on in his career, but you know he could play. He also had 398 penalty minutes that year. Career bests across the board. All those 4 stats, career best. His career stats: 163 goals, 221 assists, 384 points in 935 games, and 3,300 on the nose penalty minutes is 3 minutes 53 seconds penalties per game average. His playoff numbers: 81 games, 16 goals, 32 assists, 48 points, 274 penalty minutes in the playoffs. He was a wild man, fighting like crazy. That's 3.38 penalty minutes per game average. So it's a little lower than his regular season, but still, that's in the playoffs. In the playoffs, usually, those kind of things kind of slow down. So that's kind of a surprise. Let's see. Probert had a very tumultuous off-ice life, and he died, sadly, of a heart attack at 45 years old, July 5th, 2010, and was diagnosed with CTE post-mortem. They donated his brain for the science, and they diagnosed it. So number 9, I was sad about Proby. He was probably the best, most feared fighter of all time. Number 9, 2000s, and we've got sort of a former Hab. He was a Hab, but not long. George Larak. When Larak was on any other team, he was a feared fighter of the day. Fighting was just starting to go away, just starting to be talked about to get rid of it. So it wasn't the same in the 2000s. So the 2000s brought the beginning of the take fighting out of the game movement, but it wouldn't take hold for another decade yet. George Larak is arguably the toughest fighter to play in his era. He was 6'4". Now, in this article, it's listed 245 pounds, but then I went on Wikipedia, and they listed him there as 273 pounds. I don't know if that's really possible that he was that heavy, but anyways, somewhere in between those two numbers he was. So he was so big and strong, and he was intimidating. So much so that many fighters would rather not challenge him. And he was the best fighter of the era. He was the most intimidating guy of the era. He played for Edmonton, Phoenix, Pittsburgh, and Montreal, and with Montreal buying him out in 2010 just before he retired. Larak was never known for his offensive side, so he was one of the few guys here on this list that wasn't actually a pretty decent player offensively. His career year offensively was in 2000-2001 when he had 13 goals, 16 assists, 29 points in 82 games played and 148 penalty minutes. His highest penalty total was 157 the following year. And that proves out that fighting was on its way out by the time Larak retired. You can just look at the numbers. He was a fan favorite, but by the time he got to Montreal, he was like unwilling to fight. He had like 1-2 fights when he was here in Montreal. He was just unwilling, and listen, that's why Montreal got him. Montreal brought him in to protect the team, and he wasn't willing to, or able anymore to do that, so Montreal bought him out. Career numbers, 695 games, 53 goals, 100 assists for 153 points, 1,126 penalty minutes. That's a very low 1 minute 62, so 2 minutes and 2 seconds, I guess that means. 2 minutes, 2 seconds in penalties per game average. That's not very high. And he's got a 0.22 points per game average to show you that he's didn't have a lot of offense in him. Larak is also the only player on this list that didn't have much of an offensive game, which I said now for 2 times. Now we're up to the last one, and the last one's going to be different. The 2010s, there's not a lot. This article gave Sean Thornton. I was like, I don't think so. So what I did was, instead, I leaned towards more of the Goonie side. So I have, I'm just going to write their last names, but God, I can't remember the first one. That's it. Lucic, so Milan Lucic, Brad Marchand, and Zdeno Chara. All teammates, all on the Bruins. Now, Lucic isn't there anymore, but they made for a... They were just goons. Let me read what I wrote. Let me read what I wrote. The 2010s have seen a big crackdown on fighting in the NHL, and I don't think there's a clear best fighter, so I'm going to go with the goon aspect, the goon aspect of fighting over the last 3 decades, and I'm choosing the Boston Bruins threesome of goons, because that's what they are. Milan Lucic, Brad Marchand, who could really play, but he wants to be a bit of a goony guy, but he's got a lot of talent. He can really play. And Zdeno Chara, who also could really play, but he wants to be an idiot out there. I'm losing my microphone. All three are or were good players, but their use of goonery takes away from their actual hockey talents. Lucic with his easy-to-push buttons that turn him into an unstable idiot. Marchand for his maddening antics that turn a talented offensive weapon into a ridiculous asshole. And Chara, the guy who tried to kill Max Pacioretty by smashing him headfirst into a stanchion on the Bell Center boards. I hate the guy. Don't know how anybody gave him a standing ovation when he had his 1500th game and he played it here. I would not have. These 3 players epitomize goonery in the 2010s, in my opinion. So I don't know if they're the most, what did I call this? Toughest. I don't know if they're the toughest. Marchand's not tough. Lucic maybe, and Chara, yeah. But yeah, that's what goes for fighting in the 2010s. So there you go. That's my video. I'm losing my microphone. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Ran way too long. Hope you enjoyed it anyway. If you did, give a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel or have not subscribed yet, please subscribe, ring that notifications bell. That will get you your daily fix of Blue Blanc Rouge right here at Talking Habs. Thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate it. Stay safe out there, and peace out, y'all. My microphone's going to fall. Have a great one. Bye, everybody.